Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Philip Stein, who is the founder and CEO of Philip Stein and Associates, which is the largest U.S. CPA firm in Israel. In fact, he was one of the first accountants to work in the Israeli high-tech scene in the 1990s, and today he's got offices in Jerusalem and a branch in Beit Shemesh and Ramat Gan, and he really has a great amount of experience in tax issues that U.S. citizens have in Israel. So, Philip, let me just start with the basic question, which is, what are the biggest challenges facing U.S. citizens living in Israel when it comes to filing their tax returns?
All right. Thank you very much, Doug, first of all, for having me on your show and letting me share my actually 37 years, it'll be this summer, that I've been here in Israel. And things have changed, of course, it's a lot over those 37 years. But and in fact, I'd say in the old days, the biggest challenge was just being able to file your return before there was internet and before there was faxes and e-filing. But today, I'd say the biggest challenge facing U.S. citizens is the fact that the IRS has raised the bar in terms of what compliance. They're requiring a lot more information from U.S. citizens, certainly reports on foreign bank accounts, reports on foreign investments. There's a lot more compliance required if you own a company, if you're beneficiary of a trust. Now, those may have been forms or requirements that had been around a long time, but for the most part, the IRS was ignoring them and practitioners were ignoring them. So now when all of these things are required, and in this digital age, sometimes clients are overwhelmed by the amount of data they have to put together in order to be compliant just because they live outside of the U.S.
So let's break that down a little bit, because you, in one quick sentence, you said what is probably knocking so many people off their chairs. Let's start with the first one, which is the amount of information you have to share with the IRS regarding your Israeli account. So, like, if you own a house in Israel, is that something that...
No, you don't. That's one thing. You don't have to tell them about your house unless you're renting it out, and then it would be rental property. But under the FATCA regime, today you do have to report that if you have foreign bank accounts, including, in my opinion, retirement accounts, you are supposed to monitor them and report the highest balance that you had during the year. And a lot of things can happen during the year. Maybe you had money transferred in from one of your brokerage accounts that you manage for a client. They brought it in for one day just to help buy an apartment or upgrade. And that may have been in February, and now it's a year later, and they're having to fill out their FBAR, and they don't remember that their account was that high for a day or a couple days.
Is it really important? Does the IRS, are they going to get angry?
I don't see that they get angry, but that is certainly what the rule is. But I don't find that they do monitor those things very closely unless you entered into a voluntary disclosure program where then everything is under what we say the microscope. But for most people, a reasonable guess, the IRS will be happy to get that.
But let's say that you don't do it, you neglect to do it, or you say, my Israeli pension plans, I don't believe that's relevant to the IRS. What are the penalties people face for that?
Well, penalty for not filing an FBAR. And now today there's also a form within the 1040, Form 8938, is actually $10,000 per violation. So that's a pretty stiff penalty. Now, we have not seen the IRS really sort of pull out that stick and hit people unless, again, they were caught by the IRS or they came under voluntary disclosure and were willing to pay those penalties in order to clean up their past. But in my opinion, nowadays, also because of the Israeli banks, the people are now having to come in to people's shock and fill out Form W-9, a form I'm sure you're very well aware of in your work, and sometimes attest that they are in compliance with U.S. tax law. So if someone hasn't been filing a tax return or hasn't been filing an FBAR, they're perjuring themselves. So you don't want to get into that. And I think we're going to soon move into the next stage of FATCA, which the banks will be starting to transfer information to the Israeli Treasury, who then is supposed to transfer it to the IRS. And it won't be too long before people will be getting letters that they got information from about their Israeli bank. We're speaking the IRS, but we don't see it on your return, or we don't see it on your FBAR. So I think the message to U.S. citizens is comply, do the best you can, and you'll solve a lot of potential problems down the road.
We're speaking with CPA Philip Stein. He's based in Jerusalem but has offices around the country in Israel. He specializes in dealing with people who live in Israel and may have assets in Israel or the United States, much like I do, dealing with people who live in Israel who have U.S. brokerage accounts. And, by the way, he also does a great show called From the Midwest to the Middle East, which you can find on iTunes and elsewhere. Philip and I have actually worked with many clients together over the decades that we've both been here, because we work in this kind of special niche of Americans who live in Israel who have questions or concerns or requirements with both taxation as well as investing in the United States. So, Philip, I want to. A lot of our clients, who I'm sure you know, may have lived here a long time, but may not be great with Hebrew. And they hear terms that you and I might just refer to as retirement plans or pension plans or work plans. Tell us what some of those terms are in Hebrew and how you feel they might have to report them on their FBAR.
Yeah, the most common terms today, people who are generally working here or worked here, Keren Pensia or Pituach Menahalim, those are the two most common types of retirement plans that exist for people work here in Israel. Probably the closest thing to an IRA is called a Kupat Gemel. That's something that people on their own can set up, put money away for themselves or for their kids. And probably the term that doesn't fit into anything, there's no U.S. counterpart, but it's probably one of the most popular, and I'm not using this as a pun, vehicles for saving money. The reason I say it's not a pun is because they say most people who use what's called a Keren Hishtalmut use it to buy and replace and upgrade their cars. Is sort of a funny fund where your employer puts 7.5% of your income up to a certain ceiling. The employee puts in 2.5%. The money grows tax-free, deferred. And if the employee doesn't touch the money for 6 years, they can take it out tax-free. That's why people end up buying their cars probably every 6 years.
So tax-free in Israel. How about as far as...
Yes, tax-free in Israel. In the U.S., the way we treat these accounts, we do declare them. As you said a moment ago, we do feel they have to be put on their FBAR, but we do feel there are ways of reporting them on your U.S. tax return to mitigate the U.S. tax consequences when you do take the money out.
So that, again, sounds a little more complicated, something someone would definitely have to do with the assistance of an accountant.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's for us, it's something we do all the time, but it's something, if someone has an issue in that way, they need not be afraid of, first of all, if their employer offers them what's called a Keren Hishtalmut. Again, there's no U.S. counterpart for it. It's sort of a employee savings plan, and they should not be afraid to take it if they're offered, and they certainly shouldn't be afraid to take the money out when the time comes.
So let's talk about the fear, because many people have heard rumors that there's been a lot more auditing going on recently from the IRS to people in Israel. What's your feeling on that?
So that's a great question. Again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, I've been here almost 37 years. And I would say probably for the first 33 of them, there were very few audits for people who lived in Israel. In fact, in the old days, there was a branch of the IRS in Rome, and they used to sort of come once a year. They do a few audits. I used to meet them at the U.S. consulate, the old one in East Jerusalem, and there wasn't very much interest in people who lived outside of the United States. About 4 years ago, the IRS decided that U.S. citizens in Israel in particular who were taking advantage of something called the Child Tax Care Credit, which is a refundable $1,000 per child under the age of 17, that there was a lot of fraud that was coming out of Israel. And in fact, there was a lot of fraud because people were sort of creating income, earned income, in order to get these credits, these refundable credits. The IRS made a very big push to do audits, made a lot of people crazy, of course, honest people. That project we have, through our sources, officially ended about a year ago. So I think we're back to the old model now. Perhaps a few, audits are done long distance. They're based on digital information that the IRS receives. But the worst period, sort of the blackest period where there were a lot of people getting audited, that's behind us.
All right, so we can all breathe a collective sigh of relief. Philip, there's a lot more that people can learn. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But in the last few seconds, tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Okay, so the best way is we have a website, which is www.pstein.com. You can get a lot of information on that website. We also, as Doug, you mentioned, we have a podcast from the Middle West to the Mideast, which is also on our website or on iTunes. I also have a blog. And our local phone number, our number for all the offices is 02-644-4000, and we'll be happy to help out of any of your listeners.
Okay, and we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Philip Stein, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Looking forward to working together again this coming year.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.